I mean, what do you think the relationship is though between like there is this fusion from basically like the most surveilled, abused, murdered, terrorized populations in the country. Then there's this sort of like adjacent, very professional managerial class, which, you know, I always have my criticisms of. And there's definitely some kind of vicariousness going on. And I think there's a very big difference between, you know, it's just like my bottom line point that if an action arises from a context, I just don't have a comment on it, right? It's just not my place. And I don't even mean that to like, that's not even like a curry favor. It just really isn't a comment I have. You know, I don't know how to get any more simple and basic than that. People coming from outside context with an agenda that may at times be kind of like over performative or whatever. Yeah, I'm going to criticize that. I'm going to subject that to analysis and scrutiny, you know, even if it might, you know, not be what people want to hear. And I think that actually like, and the third leg that I want to introduce, if we were just thinking in terms of like building out some type of majority coalition to do what must be done. If you have, okay, there's like a segment of like the PMC, which like, look, better there than not there. Then there is the front lines of every type of viciousness and evil in this system, like things that everybody experiences to some degree or another, exemplify, you know, amplified on steroids in every possible way. In this, like, I'm tempted to even get into like necropolitics right now with the Achille Mbembe stuff. Mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, there is this, you know, it's the same, you know, kind of political roadblock of, you know, the resistance, the like, okay, like, hey, people should be protesting. And oh my God, I can't believe that happens. But at the same time, maybe the military should be put out because, you know, things are a little out there. Now, on platforms like this and on social media, of course, it's great to dunk on these people for their naivete and stupidity and, you know, and all of this. But at the same time, I want this to not be another performance that is like, I want this to actually transfer. So, and I have no idea how. I'm just trying to be as honest as I can in my analysis so that maybe there's even a potential of getting there. So when you think of those kind of like three zones that are implicated in this, and I'm just using the three because I'm using like those who are most invested, those who are, you know, at least engaged and not hostile, and those who are theoretically sympathetic to some things. The type of people that, yes, you said abolish the police, they would have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. But if you did say, hey, why can't foot patrols be replaced with social workers, as an example, or, you know, added education funds, or why are nonviolent offenses leading anybody to go to jail? You actually might get some traction with a fair amount of these people. So, and then I'm distinguishing that from another very serious segment of this country that wants to do Palestine in the United States, like overtly. Yeah. So what would your strategy be thinking of those three kind of broad categories? Or is that even, you know, maybe you don't like that way of categorizing it? I'm just trying to think of how to build it out here.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's certainly, I wouldn't go as far as saying that like I have a strategy that I can put forward. Certainly this is, you know, I'm someone who's watching, listening, reading, and learning, right? Just like everybody else. But I think that, first of all, in regards to the sort of first zone that you described, certainly I agree with you that like, if someone is dealing with something, experiencing something that I have not experienced and dealing with it however they can, it is absolutely not for me to judge, right? And it would be incredibly pompous and pedantic for me to say that, oh, I would conduct myself in a way that is more praiseworthy the way they're conducting themselves. I mean, I think that that's disgusting. I absolutely am not going to engage in it. And I think as well, in regards to the second zone, like the sort of managerial class, I think that it's, I think the important thing there is to recognize that you cannot, I don't think it's ever defensible to deny someone a comfort that you have. So I think a good example is you do not get to say that homelessness is inevitable from the comfort of your home. You know, I don't think it's ever defensible to deny someone something that you have. And so I think that in that, I think a lot, and I think that somewhat connects to the conversation about like details versus principles, because often the details can make certain things seem, the details can be prohibitive, right? They can make certain things seem incredibly difficult or to enact. Whereas there has to be times where we just assert or demand this will happen. It does not matter how difficult it is to bring about. It will happen because it must happen, because for it to not come about, for it to not occur is indefensible. And then for people who are saying right now, you know, well, I mean, you know, clearly something has to be done. These protests can't go on forever, and the curfew has to be imposed. And maybe the National Guard and the police and the military should go in, because how else are we going to deal with this? Well, they're clearly making an appeal to what they perceive as normalcy, right? And they're saying, well, we need a return to normalcy because that is stable. And so whatever period of instability, of aggression is required to return to that stability that I'm identifying as desirable, is legitimate. But the same argument can be put forward in response, where you're saying what you are identifying as the level of stability that you believe is desirable, from our perspective, is stable, but also uninhabitable, right? It is unacceptable. And so as you've identified yourself, a level of instability or aggressive action is acceptable if it is returning to a desirable place. What we're saying, the desirable place is much different than what you are identifying, but it is also necessary to push forward to it. And I think it's you know, it's difficult. It's difficult for some people to accept that, you know, this is the outcome of centuries of structural racism that has deprived and you know, devastated parts of the world, communities, and has created prosperity and stability for very certain people in very certain places. And so to say that we want to upend that entire system, and that a world in which a world that does not, you know, funnel all its prosperity toward particular people, is the only world that we can exist in peacefully, and the only world that we can defend and work toward. It's difficult for people to accept, but is it easier to accept the fact that the poorest and least powerful people in the world are going to die in untold numbers throughout this and the rest of this century and the next one? Is it easier to accept that it is not impossible to imagine that the only people that will be left on the planet a few hundred years from now are people who have sickening levels of wealth and power? I don't know that that's one. I don't know. I certainly don't think it's easier to accept, but I also don't know that that's a world that's worth saving, you know? And so if our task is in this era to like create peace and justice for everyone in the world, and contend with the increasing and extreme and long-term crises of climate change and structural racism and inequality and you know, sexism and ableism, then the actions that we have to take to actually address those crises will necessarily be as grand, as long-term, and as revolutionary as those structures are grand and long-term and entrenched.
Final question I have for you. What about, you know, you're in Canada, obviously. What do you think of the global dimensions of this?
Well, there have been rallies in Canada in solidarity with the protests in the U.S. There's a rally in Vancouver recently, and there are more planned. There was a rally in Toronto as well. Although in Toronto, a 29-year-old black woman named Regis Korchinski-Paquette recently died after an interaction with police. They were called to. There was a mental health support call placed by her mother to the police, and it's not clear what happened. But they arrived at the scene. Korchinski-Paquette and her mother and brother were in the hallway when they arrived. She, as the sergeant or the chief of police reported, she asked to go into the apartment to use the bathroom. She went in, police went in with her, and then she fell off the balcony and died. The police don't have body cameras, and so there isn't any footage of what happened. There are some witnesses. They're conducting interviews, but I mentioned that because the march in Toronto was in recognition of her death and calling for accountability in that event, as well as in solidarity with other events. But yeah, I mean, global dimensions of this, like, you know, I would make the argument, and I think it can be very well supported, that anti-Black racism is one of the fundamental engines of the world. It's one of the fundamental mechanisms by which the world operates and has been for centuries. And so it's addressing it, again, will take that sort of incredibly grand movement, but it's not something that's going to be addressed by politicians speaking differently or a legislative measure here or there. We're talking about, if you look at the disparities in well-being, in health outcomes, in education between Europe and Africa, that has to be addressed, right? When we say Black Lives Matter, are we including Africans? Are we including African Caribbeans? Are we including people of African descent everywhere in the world? Because we absolutely have to. And if we don't, then I don't know. I think it's absolutely necessary that we do. And so I think that the global dimensions of this have to be part of the conversation, because it is not acceptable that Africans sit at the bottom of the world as they have for centuries.
And we want no bottom of the world, period, in what the world we want to construct. Right.
Exactly.
Chucka, Ejeckam, I really appreciate your time. I hope we can have you on again soon. Stay safe, be well. Thank you.
Thank you.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.